But Damien's comment made me think of that 80s movie with Michael J. Fox and his boss tells him, "You see this time? This is God's time." And but you look at a lot of the 80s and half through the 90s movies and maybe beyond, uh, it was very common that bullying was to be part of the expectation to get people to work. And I think
Mhm.
a lot of what we know is uh, sensible employment ethics these days, especially like the statement that we just talked about, that also a lot of this indicate what kind of world we were living in then and the kind of world that is changing to now. So I know you had some comments to add about it.
Oh, I mean, what I wanted to, augment or extend in terms of what Damien was sharing
Yeah.
is, yes, first of all, who you know, yes, true. Who knows you? And what I also wanted to introduce, who you don't know yet,
Hmm.
right?
Good.
Right.
There's
Good.
a whole audience of people who you don't know yet, right? Let's just call them your sixth, fifth, seventh level of connections. They're
Mhm.
people you don't know yet. And the strength of your network, surprisingly, even though, of course, you have people that you know from past jobs, from your alumni, from this, from that, from PTA, from sports.
Hmm.
Those people are great. Those people are, people who know you.
Mhm.
But the strength of your network is also commensurate with the amount of acquaintances you have. Those people who are way outside of your immediate skill set, who you who are in what I would like to say is, new ponds, right? They're
Hmm.
they're in other places that you have yet to visit, have their eyes and ears out to different opportunities, and they don't know you yet. And believe it or not, this is also from Malcolm Gladwell's, of course, The Tipping Point, and also from Mark Gansvetter, who way back in the day, in the 1970s, had a Stanford study called Weakling Strong Ties, right? We've all heard
Hmm.
of that, at least here
Right.
we have, right?
Right.
And what that says is that the people that actually were most instrumental in people's job searches were people that were their acquaintances that they saw very infrequently, over 60%, very infrequently. And so I just don't want anybody to overlook the fact that if you are networking regularly, you are not just staying within the confines of, let's just say, your industry or within any specific vertical that is, let's just even say, comfortable, right? Get
Hmm.
outside of that. Stop staying in the same thing, because as a professor that I know, Noah Akins over at INSEAD, says, you'll be drinking dirty bathwater.
Oh.
You'll just be doing the same thing, recycling those same people, and they get tired. And so, you have to be constantly bringing in new streams of, opportunities, new people, new fish, in
Hmm.
order for you to make sure that you are not atrophying in your network as well.
Yeah,
Good.
yeah, that's good stuff. The fact that, I think it brings back to your network serves a lot of different purposes, and I think your network also supports you through a lot of the changes that seem to take place that unexpected. I mean, you looked on LinkedIn, and if you have the right network, then you can have the right culture, and a lot of it's built around your network, right? So your
Mhm.
experience is going to reflect the soul. So if you are being treated badly by your boss and you're being treated badly by the circumstances, you can reach out to your network for solutions and understanding. And what you said, even my friend Mark Miller, who was on the show a couple of weeks ago, had said how your weak ties is really where the juice is at, as far as you changing careers and changing jobs and getting referrals, is that friend of a friend of a friend, very often, not so much your direct friends. So those things I think is pretty important. I think Teddy Burris, who's chiming in, he says keep your bathrobe clean by managing who you allow in your bathtub. And he loves that, Lauren. I definitely that definitely makes me. I may use that tonight in the conversation. Who knows? Thank you very much for joining us here on the Voice of Job Seekers. This is Mark. And if you want to know more about this show, which you can get in any podcast catcher or directory, you can go to thevoiceofjobseekers.com, or you can just put in the Voice of Job Seekers. I'm the only one that will come up on your search. We just love having you listen to us every week. And if you want to leave us a review, that'll be great. Tell us, what do you think about the show and about the content, all that. So you just heard a clip from my Friday live stream, the Modern Job Search Checklist, with my co-host Damian Burkle and our guest Lauren Greff as we banter about several job search topics. You can catch the show on my timelines on Friday at 1 p.m., 12 Eastern. On my timelines, like I said, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. At this hour, unemployment for September 2021 was reported at 4.8, noting that COVID unemployment supplements have expired in September. So we'll see how that fares out for those who've been affected by it. Also at this hour, Kellogg, one of the world's largest food manufacturers, has workers on strikes in 5 states. Which, if we will look deeper at the reasons, they're the same as what everybody else is claiming, and not going back to those jobs that they once held once upon a time, and claiming unfair pay, working conditions, and inflexible schedules. We'll see how that works, especially if they're a worldwide company. If you want to hear more of the updated job search trends and advice to help you navigate the hurdles, listen to my Wednesday live stream. #JobSeekerNation, also found on my timelines. Both shows, the Job Search Checklist, Modern Job Search Checklist, and Job Seeker Nation, are at 1 p.m. Eastern and noon Central, again on Wednesdays and Fridays. Today's featured conversation is with Beverly Jones, host of the NPR podcast Jazzed About Work. She brings a wealth of knowledge about work that's refreshing to me and to many other people who do listen to our NPR podcast show. In our featured conversation, we talk about her new book, Find Happy at Work, and you can find that in your books, in your favorite bookstore, Amazon. You can also find it at her site, and I'll link to that in the show notes. Beverly is also an executive coach and career coach who's appeared on Forbes, CNN, MarketWatch, and many, many other news outlets. And she gives some really great advice. I think you'll really enjoy the conversation that we had. So I really want you to feel free not to take notes, because the transcript will actually be available in a couple of days on the site. Now, if you follow me on any of the social networks, that'll be featured there. In the meantime, enjoy the conversation, enjoy the show. Let me know what you think, and if you have questions, feel free to contact me at mark@thevoiceofjobseekers.com, or you can text me at 708-365-9822. I'll take comments there, and if there's something I can understand or that you want some feedback about the content that was in the show, feel free, and I'll be glad to text you back. Of course, at that number. In the meantime, thank you again, and enjoy the show. Next, we have, glad to see my friend Beverly Jones here, and I'm trying to get your information up here on the screen. But Beverly has graciously had me on her NPR podcast, Jazz About Work, 3 times, and loved every single time I've been on it. She has a great new book, Find Your Happy at Work, 50 Ways to Get Unstuck, Move Past Boredom, and Discover Fulfillment, coming out September 1st. Is that the correct date?
That's right. It's getting close. I'm getting excited because it's been a long process on this one.
You had to do this during the pandemic, right? I mean, you wrote a good part of it during the pandemic.
I did. I did my proposal to the publisher and all of that way back in early 2019, but these things kind of take a while. And so I had been working on it seriously for a month when the pandemic hit.
Hmm.
And it actually, in many ways, was a wonderful process because I think most frightening at the beginning for many of us. We didn't know what was going to happen and there was so much
Hmm.
uncertainty. But writing about how you can choose to be happy and how you can learn to be more comfortable with change, that was not a bad thing to be working on during the early days of the pandemic. I got to read lots of good stuff and it was not a bad process. The thing is I finished the book before the pandemic was even
Hmm.
close to being finished. So then the
Okay.
next thing was wondering what else is going to happen. But I think it all holds up.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. Well, I think it's good history in some
Mhm.
sense, but in another sense too, I think is people are looking for happiness now. That's the relevant part of it. I think people are
Mhm.
looking something because people are not don't want to go back to being unhappy and having to endure a lot of things, a lot of the work dynamic that they're used to that they didn't like to begin with. So yeah, I think that this will help clear some of the clouds that are in people's minds, so to speak, and helping them to be more targeted and be more thoughtful and be much more intentional about where they want to work and who they want to work with.
I think you're right that the COVID experience has made people think about how life is short and we only have one and we don't want to defer happiness forever.
Mhm.
And that has made people even more aware that happiness isn't something that you reach at the end of work. Happiness is your life. It's happiness is how you get through every day and how you connect
Mhm.
with people. But the interesting thing is, aside from people becoming aware that they don't want to defer happiness and it's not necessary to defer happiness. And in recent years, there's been a lot of research about the relationship between success and happiness. When you and I were in school, Mark, people may have said, if you work really hard and you'll be successful, and then one day
Yes.
you can be happy. Well,
Right.
it turns out that it doesn't work like that.
No,
Research
not at all.
shows that happiness is a kind of a positive attitude
Mhm.
can be the foundation of success, and that when you're positive, you're more creative, you get along better with people, you're more flexible. So really, having a positive attitude is a starting point of moving towards success. You don't have to wait until after you feel successful to give yourself the opportunity to enjoy life.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to that point because there is something really important I think that's relevant to it. But I do want to talk a little bit about, you wrote a book, Think Like an Entrepreneur, Act Like a CEO. I believe that's the
Mhm.
title of it. And I know there's a fundamental difference between both the books that you've written, but this one is again without you even knowing that it was going to be timely because people are looking being happy. Can people have both the idea? I mean, well, part of the idea of being happy is being able to think like an entrepreneur because you take a lot of ownership and you take a lot of control of your career that way. And I think that's where you'll derive a lot of happiness, but also that there might be a slight chasm is that you're going to be looking at your employer a lot differently than you ever had before. And employers aren't necessarily made to be your happy place within themselves.
Well, I think the two things work together, and I'm glad you
Mhm.
mentioned um, that first book. When I was talking about thinking like an entrepreneur and acting like a CEO, I wasn't necessarily talking about going out and starting a business. What I had noticed in my own career, and
Mhm.
then certainly after I started coaching and lots of other people's careers along the way, is
Mhm.
that it used to be that we'd have this idea that we would get a job and the job would take care of us.
Mhm.
And I've worked with lots of big organizations myself and with people in big organizations and that enter with the idea that, all right, they've got the job, they just had to do what they're told, and the company would take care of them or the government would take care of them. And it's
Mhm.
not like that. What happens in real life is that if you start a job, wherever it is, it's really that you have um, created an opportunity to
Mhm.
explore lots of options. And even if you've started a government job and you want to be there all your life, and there's a chance that could happen, every day your work is a bundle of opportunities. And every day, if you look at them in an entrepreneurial sort of way and find ways to add value and find ways to connect with people, you're going to create the possibility of success there, but also the possibility of moving on if you want to. So that was the big part of the first one. These are the ways you can act like an entrepreneur and create a
Mhm.
resilient career. And the next one kind of assumes those things. I think we've come further as a culture, certainly as a collection of professionals. We know much more about how we have to take advantage of opportunities. But the next one says it's not just about how you behave at work, it's how you manage yourself, how you create a relationship with work, and how you manage
Mhm.
your own head, your own attitude. So that one sort of follows the other.
Mhm. Yeah, I think one of the things we've been talking about in the past two interviews, and not always directly, is people are going to dig a little bit deeper to find that happiness at the outset first. They're going to dig into. We, as my friend and I just talked about a few minutes ago, about how job seekers now are going to go really dig into who are they working with rather than what they're working with. The who we're working with is going to matter a whole lot more, and the team that they work with is going to matter just as much as what they're working with and what they're working for, because that's who they're going to end up being and interacting with on a regular basis. And as if you're handling your career as you was an entrepreneur, strategic relationships are really key. And if you're going to be with somebody for the next couple of years, you're going to want to, you're going to have to be a lot more strategic about who you work with. Did that
I
make any sense?
Yes, I absolutely agree with that, but with a caveat.
Okay.
Uh, First, we are recognizing, I think, through psychologist research and just the modern culture, that human beings are born to be connected with other human beings.
Hmm.
Our ancient ancestors who were hunter gatherers couldn't survive by themselves. They had to be in groups. And so we
Hmm.
evolved to have the skills like noticing emotion and empathy and those kinds of things. We evolved to be able to connect with other people. And
Hmm.
everything that we do now in modern times kind of calls on those skills. And I think there's much more recognition about the importance of knowing how to be part of a team and choosing the team you want. All the things you said, I agree with that. On the other hand, we people have a tendency to blame other people, to blame the team, to not
Hmm.
to get their feelings hurt if there's criticism, to get angry if things don't go their way. And so the caveat is that, again, it's the entrepreneurial attitude. If you're an entrepreneur and you make a product and
Hmm.
the the public, your customers don't like it, doesn't do any good to get mad at them. What
Right.
you have to do is learn how to communicate, learn how to listen, learn about what needs to happen and how you can contribute. And I think it's the same. The team is vitally important, but so is your commitment to communicate, to understand, to figure out how to make a contribution.
Yeah. Yeah. So, with the pandemic in mind, knowing that the working relationships have changed a little bit, and I understand you wrote the book before the pandemic and all that, it has the hybrid of what you know now as opposed to what you knew back in 2019. Is that reshaping your advice that you give to your clients now when they're changing careers?
I think it just makes it more clear that the things we were speculating about a couple of years ago are happening more quickly than we thought. I
Hmm.
did have a chance to go back and look at the book, and it's a very tightly written book, but I had an opportunity to take out things that didn't resonate and so forth. And I was kind of surprised there may be language in there that talks about going to the office when people are thinking nobody's going to the office. I may have missed some things like that.
Hmm.
But I think that the basic idea is absolutely the same, that we want more agency over our career. We want to own our career. We want to operate our career so that it gives us maximum flexibility. So we have this huge network and we can make changes. We want to
Hmm.
take responsibility and we want to grab the rewards that we really need. And that's just not dollars. It's a healthy lifestyle and it's teamwork and all those other things. I think the things that I think you and I maybe chatted about years ago on our first podcast, they're just more true than we even knew they were going to be.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, and I think there's a lot of. I don't think that that the fundamental ideas have changed. A lot of it, what we're talking about, and a lot of what people are talking about, is the logistics as far as where and how much. But I think the nature of people has not changed. That if they feel they want to be somewhere where they will be the most productive, and happiness is directly correlated to being productive.
Hmm. Yeah, being productive and using your expertise and making a contribution to mission or values that are important to you. Um, those are really the fundamentals.
Yes, and since you mentioned values, I think, and you could tell me if you agree or not, that values mean a whole lot more now, and kind of are at the front and center because a lot of it, what's being discussed and whether people are working home or at the office is about values because there's the child care, there's issues that I care about, there's the dynamic of not having to travel 2 or 3 hours a day to go
Mhm.
to work, all those things that people will be more interested in how companies are going to respond to that now than ever. And, they don't feel like that company is at least being honest about the way that they're going to go about it. Somebody's going to get the sense that I'm not going to really be happy here, and that's really what's going to matter the most to me.
I think that's exactly right. When I work with clients, for some time, I've used a little tool that I call the engagement triangle. It's
Hmm.
basically a discussion tool to talking with people about what makes them happy at work, what would help them be more engaged in work. And to me, it feels like if you go through all of the research and just the things we notice, and that is that the three things that seem to be keys to being happy at work. One
Hmm.
of them, it's purpose, people, and performance are the three. But purpose is just what you were talking about. It's values. It's the things that matter to you. It's the reasons you're working, whether it's because you've always wanted to be a journalist or you want to send your kids to school, whatever it is, those values. And then what's the mission of the organization and how are these aligned? And does
Hmm.
the organization that you're working for care about you and does it support all these things? That alignment's really important. Another one is the people. It's your team, but it's also the stakeholders, who's impacted by what you do, how are you going to connect with other people, all of the ways you connect with people. And then the finally performance you just alluded to, it's, can you be productive, can you use your expertise, can you learn, can you grow, does this make sense, is this a meaningful thing you're doing? So those three things are kind of featured in the book. They're a theme in the book. And I think that just talking to people who've been going through the thoughtfulness that the pandemic forced on us, they're
Hmm.
thinking about those three things, across the world.
Yeah. Now, I know a lot of your clients, probably in recent years, you could tell me if this is true. How do you notice a difference between being that older workers have kind of taken a beating during this pandemic, especially at the beginning, forcing a lot of people to retire? Do you find that perhaps by the current climate that there might be a resurgence in the way not only that there are more older workers coming back into the workforce, but there might be a resurgence in the way that they look at work these days.
I absolutely think so. A year ago, a little more than a year ago, it felt very grim. I knew so many people who were forced into retirement or
Hmm.
who took a package that they didn't really want or who just
Right.
lost their jobs or who were just laid off. There were just so many people. But at the time, the older workers were the most in despair. Many of them, because of where they were in life, they had
Hmm.
kids who were going to college or whatever, were worried that they'd never get the same job again. But the fact of the matter is, I think we've adjusted that, yeah, people may not get the same job again, but
Right.
there's so many opportunities out there. And careers can be long, and you can do a portfolio kind of career where you work
Hmm.
a lot now, and maybe you're going to work longer than you ever thought you would, but you're going to have fun doing it, and you're going to have other things in your portfolio.
Hmm.
There's so many opportunities opening up, and remote work certainly is one surprise for older workers they may not have thought about. And now there are opportunities to connect with jobs all over the country to do things they never dreamt that they could do. But it
Hmm.
requires, of course, being willing to change and to learn new things and all the things we older workers have to manage. They're more
Yeah.
important than ever.
Yeah, perhaps, and in many cases, the values are mattering a whole lot more than ever, and that the skill part is being put on the shelf, at least to some degree. That the values are mattering, and that they're searching for the company or the individuals or the purpose and the mission,
Mhm.
instead of using those skills that they paid for back way back when.
Yeah, I think that's often the case, but another part of it is that I see happening is people are figuring out that, the maybe it was a law degree or a technical skill that you worked really hard and didn't seem relevant anymore. Well, whatever it was you used to do and you're not doing now, there's knowledge, there's expertise, there's judgment, there are communication skills, there are all kinds of things that were probably part of what you were doing before. And so now I think people are starting to deconstruct the things they were good at and recognize that there are going to be new fields opening up. There are new fields opening up. And so there are ways to reapply what they already know. And also, they have learning skills. There's so
Mhm.
many ways to get certifications, to get training, to go back to school, or to learn new things without going back to school. And when you've had any kind of success, you've got learning skills, and that's really important.
Sure. Are there any stories, maybe one particular from the book that you can recall that exemplifies that or gives a best indicator of what is to come for older workers, or maybe even those who might be in the midlife crisis part of this, not the pandemic, but in their midlife crisis and the way they're looking and the way that they've changed their view of work?
Well, I will talk about one that's not in the book, but it
Okay,
involves
that's fine.
talking about the book. So,
All
my
right.
podcast just about work,
Uh-huh.
and, I was recruited to do that, oh gosh, 5 years ago
Mm-hmm.
by WOUB, which is the public media operation, a big operation at Ohio
Mm-hmm.
University, and an old, friend had been a judge, he'd been a lawyer, he'd run the journalism school, and he took over WOUB to kind of remake it, and he wanted to do podcasts and lots of things. So
Mm-hmm.
he brought me in. He had a very distinguished career. I mean, he worked for the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and he was the youngest judge ever elected in Ohio, and so forth and so forth and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So he started doing great things at WOUB, and then finally it dawned on him that everything was changing and that it probably made sense for him as an older employee to take a package and retire, and he had never thought about retirement. And so he came on in a series of podcasts, and we talked about things that were in the book, and we talked about unretirement, and
Mm-hmm.
he ended up saying, you know what, now I'm excited. I suddenly realized there's so many things I can do. I'm going to start a company to do this. I'm going to pursue another interest over here. And he has kind of, through the pandemic, created a whole new career. He's doing virtual courses. He's teaching people about dealing with the media,
Mhm.
people who are spread around the country because he can do that now. He's teaching about media innovation. He's doing different kinds
Mhm.
of podcast and recording. And we kind of talked about it in the series of podcasts in which he explained that, he felt very anxious, he felt sad about leaving, and now he's doing so many interesting things. And he's in his 70s and he's in a new world now and he's having a wonderful time.
Well, he's doing what feels good, and sometimes you don't discover that until you are in a place where you have no other choice, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think, sometimes we get hooked on the, oh, I don't know, the sense of being experts and our rank and, that sense of security. And when the sense of security is pulled away, it's very frightening. But we lose a whole lot of baggage at the same time, and it can feel quite liberating to start over.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I think in our generation, we were orientated to emphasize obligation rather than mission, values, what feels good, what makes me happy. And those are things that we got to create. They just don't happen. In your case and the station manager's case and in my case, we're creating things that make us happy, and they don't come along by themselves. That everybody's going to have to create a kind of a portfolio career whether they like it or not.
Mhm.
Maybe not in their 20s and 30s, but when it gets to the 40s and 50s, the workplace looks at you different. Your employer looks at you different. And your family starts to look at different. Sometimes those don't always line up.
That's right. And so we used to think years ago the word obligation is exactly the right one, that if you took a job, you were obligated to do what you were told. You we were very good about coming in on time and sticking to the letter. That doesn't work anymore,
Hmm.
and nobody wants it. Employers don't want it. They want people who are creative and who can notice new things and who can innovate in the front lines. And giving up this sense of duty and obligation and thinking more about values and contribution and taking care of each other, I think everybody is going to benefit from much more productive and fast moving organizations.
Yeah, yeah. If there's one takeaway for people who are reading, or if there's one or two takeaways, what seems to be the most resonant to you right now?
One takeaway that I really absolutely believe in, that if you're in a career crisis or you're just plain stuck and bored, the go-to thing is always learn something new.
Hmm.
That if you're in a learning mode, everything changes. You become creative, you open opportunities, you become more open-minded, and you stop being bored. Learning can be exciting and interesting and can open your eyes to new opportunities. So when people are really feeling stuck, learn something new. I think that's a real important element in the book. And the other thing we talked about people. I have quite a few chapters on networking later in the
Hmm.
book. And I know that some people cringe, they don't even like the word networking. But get back to what we were saying earlier, networking
Hmm.
is about connecting with other people and understanding and engaging. And if you are widely connected, particularly with a diverse group of people, it doesn't mean you have to spend all of your time with them, but being
Right.
open to acquaintances with a wide variety of people and being aware of them, you just have so much more rich opportunity. So it is always a starting place when people want to make a change is to kind of think about how they're connecting with others.
Sure, and I think the conversations you have in those times are the most enlightening and better intel than any book or course that you could possibly take. Especially if you have a passion for it and you're able to talk ad nauseum about it. I think that's where passion is good. Passion doesn't lead you to the water, though, necessarily.
Right.
So, but it does at least gets your energy to the point to where you are able to increase the amount of that you're able to see if you're able to adapt and to the new environment and the new information and how it will apply to you. Those things are invaluable, especially you and I know this because we do podcasts, we talk to a whole lot of people, and having a half hour discussion with a couple of hundred people changes your life and changes your perspective.
Particularly if we study everything we can about them before the podcast. It's a wonderful
Yes.
way to expand our view of the world.
Yes, yes, and your book, I'm sure, is going to make a major difference in a lot of people's lives. Find your happy at work 50 ways to get unstuck, move past boredom, and discover fulfillment. Ready to be out by the time this will air on the podcast. It will be out. But
Yeah,
those of you who are watching the live stream, you can go to Amazon and find the book and pre-order it
exactly.
and get a lot out of it. And again, jazzed about work, and I'd be remiss not to also talk about that piece of work there at npr.org. You could just put that in the search engine, or you could just look it up on your podcast directory and find
Yeah.
that informative every week. Thank you so much, Beverly, for coming on.
Well, it's always wonderful to talk with you, and I always learn from you. I enjoy it so much.
Yes, and the same with you as well. Love learning from you and listening to you. And there's a number of shows. I remember the first time. I think I don't remember the first friend. I think it was Susan Joyce. Might have been the first person I heard you with. And to also discover, we also wrote for the same platform on
Mhm. Yeah.
job-hunt.org back in the day.
Yes.
So so anyway, I'll let you get going. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you. I totally enjoyed it. Take care.
Thank you. Take care. In the meantime, peace in the valley of love.